What happens when a perfect life is a perfect lie? Tonight, we take you inside the most exclusive event of the year, the Crystal Legacy Gala, where billionaire tech mogul Alistair Finch was set to be honored. But the real headline wasn't his award. It was the moment his beautiful mistress, Cassandra Thorne, kissed him on stage in front of the world and in front of his pregnant wife. But his wife, Eleanora Vance Finch, didn't cry. She didn't scream. She did something no one expected. She walked past her husband, picked up the microphone, and brought an empire to its knees. The air in the Grand Hall of the St. Regis, New York, was not merely conditioned, it was curated. It tasted of money, a metallic tang of ambition mixed with the floral sweetness of 1,000 white orchids, their petals shivering under the light of chandeliers that dripped Swarovski crystals like frozen tears. This was the Crystal Legacy Gala, the city's premier philanthropic event. And tonight, its heart and soul was Alistair Finch. Eleanor, or Ellie as she was known to those close to her, watched her husband from their table, a prime piece of real estate at the edge of the dance floor. A gentle, protective hand rested on the swell of her stomach, where their son, their first child, was sleeping. 7 months. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. She wore a deep emerald gown by Valentino, the silk whispering over her changed form. She had never felt more beautiful or more fragile. Alistair was a supernova. At 42, he had the raw, restless energy of a man half his age, tempered by the predatory stillness of a CEO who'd built his empire, Finch Dynamics, from a garage startup into a global tech behemoth. He moved through the crowd like a shark, all charming smiles and firm handshakes, his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit a second skin. He was hers. The world knew it. But lately, a small, cold worm of doubt had begun to burrow into the core of her certainty. It was the little things, the late-night calls he'd take in his study, the door clicked softly shut, the scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging faintly to his collar, the way his thumb would ghost over his phone screen, an almost imperceptible hesitation before he put it away when she entered a room. When she'd asked, he'd laughed, a deep, reassuring sound that almost worked. "Ellie, darling," he'd said, kissing her forehead. "Paranoid and pregnant. It's adorable. The only woman on my mind is you, and this little guy, of course." Tonight, the worm of doubt was feasting. She saw her. Across the room, standing near the silent auction displays, was a woman in a crimson dress so audacious it was practically a declaration of war. It clung to a figure that was all sharp angles and sinuous curves. Her hair was a sheet of polished obsidian, and her smile as she schmoozed with a senator was sharp enough to cut glass. Cassandra Thorne, Vice President of Strategic Communications for a rival firm. Ellie knew of her by reputation, brilliant, ruthless, and utterly magnetic. She'd seen Alistair with her once, a month ago, at a business lunch. A necessary evil, he'd called the meeting. But Ellie had seen the way Cassandra had leaned in, her hand resting on Alistair's forearm for a fraction of a second too long. She'd seen the way Alistair hadn't pulled away. Now, their eyes met across the glittering expanse. Cassandra's gaze held a flicker of something triumphant, a knowing smirk that was gone as quickly as it appeared. Ellie felt a chill, a primal warning that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "He's a wonder, isn't he?" A voice beside her made her jump. It was Beatrice Vanderkamp, a society matron whose face was a testament to the marvels of modern surgery. "He is," Ellie agreed, forcing a smile. "And you, my dear, are glowing, positively radiant," Beatrice cooed, her eyes, however, darting towards Alistair. "He's about to give his speech. The man of the hour." Indeed, the master of ceremonies was at the lectern, his voice booming through the sound system. A man whose vision is matched only by his generosity. Please welcome the recipient of this year's Crystal Legacy Award, the founder and CEO of Finch Dynamics, Mr. Alistair Finch. A wave of thunderous applause washed over the hall. Alistair, looking humbled and powerful all at once, ascended the few steps to the stage. He kissed the MC's wife on the cheek, shook his hand, and stepped up to the microphone. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing a brilliant white spotlight on him. He was magnificent. He spoke of innovation, of responsibility, of the future. He spoke of creating a legacy, and as he said the word, his eyes found Ellie's in the crowd. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that for a moment made the cold worm in her stomach die. He was talking about them, about their child, their future. This legacy, Alistair said, his voice resonating with emotion, is not mine alone. It is built on the foundation of a partnership with my brilliant, beautiful wife, Eleanor. He gestured to her, and the applause swelled again. A hot blush of pride and relief crept up Ellie's neck. She was being foolish. Paranoid and pregnant. Alistair was wrapping up. So, I thank you for this incredible honor. It is a reminder that what we build is not for ourselves, but for the generations to come. And then it happened. From the side of the stage, a flash of crimson moved. It was Cassandra Thorne. She walked with a predator's unhurried grace straight towards the circle of light. A few people murmured, assuming she was part of the presentation, perhaps bringing him the physical award. Alistair looked momentarily confused, his speech faltering. She didn't stop until she was standing directly in front of him. The entire hall held its breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the click-whir of a few press cameras. With a devastatingly confident smile, Cassandra reached up, not with an award, but with her hands. She made a show of straightening his perfectly straight tie, her fingers brushing his chest. She leaned in and whispered something only he could hear. Alistair's face went rigid. Then she rose on her toes, cupped his face in her hands, and kissed him. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a deep, possessive, soul-stealing kiss, right there on stage, in the blinding spotlight, in front of 500 of New York's most influential people. In front of his wife. The camera flashes erupted, a violent, strobing frenzy of light capturing every damning second. The worm of doubt was gone. In its place, a dragon forged of ice and fire uncoiled, its cold fury a sudden, clarifying force. The curated air suddenly felt thin, unbreathable. The crystal chandeliers seemed to mock her, their light cold and cruel. Her world had just cracked down the middle. Time seemed to warp, to stretch and snap back like cheap elastic. The kiss ended, but the image was seared onto the back of Ellie's eyelids, Cassandra's crimson-stained lips pulling away from her husband's, a single glistening strand of saliva connecting them for a horrifying instant before it broke. Alistair shoved her away. It was a clumsy, delayed reaction, the movement of a man whose brain was struggling to catch up with a catastrophe. His face was a mask of shock and abject panic. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes wide and searching, desperate. They landed on Ellie. The apology, the terror, the pleat was all there. But it was too late. The betrayal had been broadcast in high definition. Cassandra, however, was a portrait of serene victory. She took a single step back, her expression not of a scorned lover but of a CEO who had just successfully executed a hostile takeover. She gave a minute, almost imperceptible nod to someone in the crowd, then turned and walked off the stage with the same unhurried grace with which she had arrived, leaving Alistair alone in the spotlight with the smoking ruins of his life. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room, followed by a frantic, buzzing murmur as 1,000 smartphones were raised, their lenses hungry for the unfolding drama. Beatrice Vanderkamp, beside Ellie, looked as if she'd seen a ghost. Ellie felt nothing, and then she felt everything. It wasn't the slow, crushing sadness she might have expected. It was a violent alchemy in her blood. The shock flash froze her heart, and then a wave of incandescent rage, pure and clean as a laser, melted it. The baby inside her gave a sudden, sharp kick, as if in agreement. This will not stand. Her vision narrowed, the hundreds of gawking faces fading into a blurry periphery. There were only 3 points of focus left in her universe: the man on the stage, the crimson dress disappearing into the wings, and the sleek silver microphone on the lectern still live, still waiting. Alistair started to stammer, to salvage. Ladies and gentlemen, please. A misunderstanding. But no one was listening to him. They were all watching her. Ellie pushed her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor. The sound cut through the din. She stood up. Her movements were not frantic or hysterical, they were deliberate, imbued with a preternatural calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. She calmly placed her napkin neatly on the table, a small, deliberate act of defiance that was louder than any scream. "Ellie, don't," Alistair pleaded from the stage, his voice cracking, the microphone amplifying his pathetic desperation. She ignored him, her gaze fixed on the stage. She began to walk. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. The whispers died. The clicking of cameras paused. Every eye in the room followed the pregnant woman in the emerald green dress as she walked, not to her husband's side to play the part of the supportive, humiliated wife, but straight towards the lectern. An event coordinator, a harried-looking man with a clipboard, moved to intercept her. "Mrs. Finch, perhaps we should." Ellie didn't even look at him. She simply raised a hand, a gesture of regal dismissal that stopped him dead in his tracks. She reached the stage and ascended the steps, her heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm. She walked past Alistair as if he were a piece of furniture, her eyes never once acknowledging his existence. She reached the lectern and her hand, steady and sure, wrapped around the cool metal of the microphone. She lifted it from its stand. She felt its weight, its power. She held the silence of the room in her palm. She brought it to her lips. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a shriek or a sob. It was clear, measured, and resonated with an Arctic chill that seemed to drop the temperature of the room by 20 degrees. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Please, don't stop your conversations on my account. I'm sure they're suddenly much more interesting." A nervous titter went through the crowd. Alistair looked like he was about to be physically ill. "My husband, Alistair, was just speaking about legacy," Ellie continued, her eyes scanning the room, making contact with one stunned face after another. "It's a word he's very fond of. Building a legacy. Leaving a legacy. The Finch legacy." She paused, letting the word hang in the air. "And I'd like to thank Ms. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with venomous politeness, "for her very public demonstration tonight. She has given us all a crystal-clear understanding of the kind of legacy Alistair is truly building. One based on deception, disrespect, and spectacular lapses in judgment." The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the water glasses. "But here's a small detail about our partnership, about the foundation of Finch dynamics, that Alistair seems to have forgotten in his pursuit of other assets." Ellie's gaze was now a physical force, pinning the most powerful people in the city to their seats. "When we married, my father, Robert Van Say, a man most of you knew as Alistair's first and most significant mentor, did not just give me his blessing. He gave me his entire stake in this company. He placed it in a family trust, of which I am the sole primary shareholder. A trust that, as of our wedding day, holds a 48% controlling interest in Finch Dynamics." A series of audible gasps swept the room. Board members at a table near the front exchanged panicked looks. Alistair's face had gone from pale to a ghastly, bloodless white. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time in years, and saw not his gentle, loving wife, but a stranger, a queen, a judge. "It was a wedding gift," Ellie said, a cruel, beautiful smile playing on her lips. "A safety net. My father always said to protect your investments. It seems he was wiser than any of us knew." She took a breath, her hand coming to rest once more on her belly. Alistair spoke of the generations to come. "And he's right. I am bringing the next generation of the Vance family, the majority shareholders of this company, into the world in 8 weeks. And I will not have my child's legacy, my father's legacy, tainted by this kind of tawdry, pathetic scandal." Her eyes finally settled on her husband. The ice in her gaze was enough to give a man frostbite. So, effective immediately, I will be exercising my full rights as the controlling shareholder. I will be calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning to discuss the future leadership of this company. And as of this moment, consider this my official announcement that I will be filing for divorce. She looked out at the stunned audience one last time. Thank you for your time. And please, enjoy the salmon. With that, she let go of the microphone. It didn't clatter. It fell with a heavy, definitive thud, the sound echoing through the silent hall like a gunshot. The sound of an ending, and a beginning. Ellie turned, and without a backward glance at the man she had just publicly castrated, she walked off the stage, through the parted crowd, and out of the grand hall, her head held high, leaving absolute chaos in her wake. The doors of the St. Regis closed behind Ellie, muffling the explosion of noise she had detonated. The cool night air hit her face, a welcome shock after the suffocating atmosphere of the gala. For a moment, she leaned against the cold stone of the building, the adrenaline that had propelled her through the last 10 minutes beginning to ebb, leaving a vast, hollow emptiness in its wake. The dragon of rage was sated for now, replaced by a profound, seismic tremor of grief. Her marriage was over. The man she loved or the man she thought she loved was a phantom. A doorman rushed to her side. Mrs. Finch, are you all right? Shall I get your car? Yes, thank you, Daniel, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She would not fall apart on a Manhattan sidewalk. The black Bentley purred to the curb. As she got in, her phone, which she'd left on the table, began to scream. It was Alistair. She looked at his name on the screen, a name that had once made her heart leap, and felt a wave of nausea. She declined the call. He called again. Declined. A text message appeared, Ellie, please, we have to talk. It's not what it looked like. She laughed, a short, bitter, humorless sound. Not what it looked like. It was precisely what it looked like. A public, flagrant act of infidelity. She powered the phone off and dropped it into her clutch as if it were contaminated. The drive to their Fifth Avenue penthouse, the home she had so lovingly decorated, felt like a journey to a foreign land. Every landmark, every familiar street corner seemed to mock her with memories of a life that was now a lie. Back at the St. Regis, Alistair Finch was in hell. The moment Ellie left, the room had erupted. Reporters who had been cordoned off broke through the velvet ropes, shouting questions, their cameras flashing in his face. Mr. Finch, is it true your wife controls the company? A comment on the affair, sir. What will this do to your stock price? His board members, a gaggle of grim-faced men in tuxedos, surrounded him. Alistair, what in God's name was that? Demanded Marcus Thorne, the chairman, no relation to Cassandra, a fact that was of little comfort now. A 48% trust? Why were we never made aware of the specifics of this arrangement? It was symbolic, Alistair choked out, running a hand through his hair. A family thing. I never thought she would use it. He couldn't even finish the sentence. He had always mistaken her quiet grace for weakness, her deep love for pliability. It was the single greatest, and now most devastating, miscalculation of his life. He saw Cassandra being cornered by security near an exit. She looked frantic, her triumphant composure shattered. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A public spat, a messy divorce, maybe a small dip in the stock, that was the plan. Not this. Not a public execution where the victim's wife seized the guillotine. Their eyes met, and in her panicked expression, he saw not a passionate lover, but an accomplice in his own destruction. He turned away from her in disgust. By the time Alistair made it home hours later, the storm had broken online. Finch Gala Showdown was the #1 trending topic worldwide. News sites had the video of the kiss and Ellie's speech on a continuous loop. Financial analysts were predicting a bloodbath when the markets opened. Finch Dynamics, the titan of the industry, was suddenly vulnerable, bleeding, and circling sharks were beginning to smell it. He found the penthouse dark and silent. Half of Ellie's clothes were gone from the closet. Her jewelry box was empty. A framed photo of them on their wedding day lay face down on her bedside table. It was a declaration more final than any spoken word. He slumped onto the bed, the reality of his loss crashing down on him. It wasn't just the company. It was Ellie. The warmth she brought to his life, the way she could gently deflate his ego with a single witty remark, the quiet joy on her face when she told him she was pregnant. He had shattered it all for a cheap thrill, for the intoxicating vanity of being desired by a woman like Cassandra Thorne. Meanwhile, Ellie wasn't at her mother's, as Alistair might have assumed. She was in a suite at the Carlisle, a place of quiet, old-world discretion. The first person she called was not her mother, but her father's lawyer, a shrewd 70-year-old man named Samuel Blackwood. "Samuel, it's Eleanor Finch." "Ellie," he said, his voice instantly alert. "I saw the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Samuel. In fact, I've never been more clear-headed. I need you to assemble our legal team. And I need you to pull every document related to the Vance family trust. Every clause, every bylaw. I want to know exactly what kind of power I'm holding." "I have them right here," Samuel said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Your father was a brilliant man, Ellie. He always said Alistair's ambition was a rocket, but he wanted to make sure you held the launch codes. The trust gives you more than just voting power. You have the right to veto any merger or acquisition, to approve any new board appointments, and, most critically, to call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO for actions detrimental to the company's reputation and financial stability." Ellie felt a grim smile touch her lips. Actions detrimental to the company's reputation. Her father had seen this coming. He had known Alistair, perhaps better than she ever had. This wasn't just a safety net. It was a weapon. The second twist was unfolding, a story buried in old legal documents and the quiet wisdom of a dead man. Robert Vance hadn't just been Alistair's mentor, he had been his silent partner, providing the seed money and the initial, crucial connections that got Finch Dynamics off the ground. Alistair had rewritten history, casting himself as the lone, self-made genius. The trust wasn't a gift, it was a reclamation. It was Robert Vance ensuring his daughter would always hold the reins of the empire he helped build. As Ellie and Samuel planned their strategy, another meeting was taking place in a sleek, minimalist office overlooking Central Park. Cassandra Thorne stood before Julian Croft, the CEO of rival tech firm Etheria. Croft was a man with a reptilian smile and eyes that were cold and dead. "That was not the plan, Cassandra," he hissed, throwing a tablet onto his desk. The screen showed an article, "Eleanor's Empire, the woman who now controls Finch Dynamics." The goal was to destabilize him, to make him a pariah so we could initiate a takeover bid when the stock crashes, Croft spat. The goal was not to turn his mousy wife into Joan of Arc. You were supposed to create a liability, not a martyr queen. "I didn't know about the trust," Cassandra insisted, her voice trembling slightly. The power she thought she was seizing had vanished. "No one did. He told me she was nothing, just an accessory." "Well, you were wrong, and your mistake may have cost me billions," Croft said, his voice dangerously low. "Your usefulness is at an end. Get out." Cassandra stared at him, horrified. The senior position, the payoff, the power, it was all evaporating. She had lit a match to Alistair Finch's life, and now she was being burned by the same fire. She had been a pawn in a game far larger than she'd ever imagined. And she had just been sacrificed. The sun rose over New York City, casting long shadows. For Alistair, it was the dawn of a nightmare. For Cassandra, the beginning of her fall. But for Eleanor Vance Finch, sitting in her suite at the Carlisle with a team of lawyers and a pot of black coffee, it was the dawn of her reign. The battle had just begun. The days that followed the gala were a brutal education for Alistair Finch. The stock of Finch Dynamics didn't just dip, it plummeted. It fell nearly 40% in 72 hours, wiping out billions in market value. The financial world, which had once worshipped his Midas touch, now treated him like a leper. He was trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, the penthouse feeling less like a home and more like a prison. His attempts to reach Ellie were met with a wall of impenetrable silence. Dozens of calls went to voicemail, his texts, ranging from desperate apologies to furious demands, remained unread. He sent a small forest's worth of flowers to her mother's estate, only to be informed by a frosty housekeeper that Mrs. Finch was not in residence and all deliveries were being refused. He was an island, and the tide was rising. Humiliation was a foreign country to Alistair, and he was an unwelcome tourist. He was a man accustomed to fixing problems with money, power, or charm. But this problem was different. This problem had a name, Eleonora, and she was immune to all three. The realization that he had not only lost her, but had fundamentally misunderstood her, was the most bitter pill to swallow. He had seen her as a beautiful, gentle counterpart to his ambition, the soft place for his hard world to land. He never bothered to look at the steel in her spine. Ellie, meanwhile, was operating with the cool, methodical precision of a field marshal. The suite at the Carlisle had been transformed into a war room. Armed with Samuel Blackwood's legal team and a newfound, ferocious sense of purpose, she dissected the architecture of the company she now controlled. She spent 16 hours a day in meetings, on calls, absorbing decades of financial reports, personnel files, and strategic plans. The quiet art historian was gone, replaced by a formidable corporate mind. It turned out she had inherited more than just her father's shares, she had inherited his acumen. She learned of Julian Croft's shadow war against Finch Dynamics, the subtle market manipulations, the poaching of key talent, the carefully planted negative press. And she learned, through a private investigator Samuel had hired, of Cassandra Thorne's role as a corporate saboteur. The investigator uncovered encrypted emails and offshore payments linking Cassandra directly to Etheria. The kiss had not been an act of passion or even ambition. It was a contracted hit job. The knowledge didn't hurt Ellie. It hardened her. It scrubbed away the last lingering vestiges of personal pain and replaced them with cold, strategic anger. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. This was about defending her father's legacy from jackals. 1 week after the gala, the emergency board meeting was called. It was held in the cavernous, intimidating boardroom on the top floor of the Finch Dynamics Tower. The long, polished mahogany table felt like a battlefield. Alistair was there, looking hollowed out, a ghost in his own kingdom. The board members, 10 men and 1 woman, sat with grim, anxious expressions. At the far end of the table sat Julian Croft and his legal team, invited as observers, circling like vultures, ready to present their hostile takeover bid the moment the company was officially leaderless. Next to them, looking small and pale, was Cassandra Thorne. Croft had dragged her there as a final, cruel display of her failure. The doors opened and Ellie entered. The room fell silent. She was not the same woman from the gala. She wore a bespoke power suit in a shade of deep charcoal gray that made her emerald eyes seem to flash. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She exuded an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. She did not look at Alistair. Her eyes swept over the board, lingered for a cold moment on Julian Croft, and then she took her seat at the head of the table. Her father's seat. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm and commanding. "Thank you for coming. We are here to discuss the future of this company, a future that, due to recent events, has been placed in severe jeopardy." Marcus Thorne, the chairman, cleared his throat. "Eleonora. Mrs. Finch, we have received a preliminary takeover offer from Mr. Croft and Etheria. Given the instability of the stock and the leadership crisis, it's an offer we are legally obligated to consider." "An offer predicated on a crisis of his own making," Ellie countered smoothly. She gestured to Samuel Blackwood, who began distributing a file to each board member. In this file, you will find evidence of a concerted effort by Etheria to sabotage Finch Dynamics. You'll find proof of payments made to Ms. Thorne, who is present today, for the explicit purpose of manufacturing a scandal to devalue our company. Cassandra flinched as if struck. Julian Croft's reptilian smile flickered for the first time. Ellie continued, her voice relentless. Mr. Croft's offer isn't a rescue. It's the final move in a game of corporate espionage. He didn't count on the fact that the company he was trying to gut was not owned by the man he was targeting, but by me. She let that sink in. And I have no intention of allowing my father's work to be devoured by a snake. She then played her masterstroke. For the past week, I have not been idle. While Mr. Croft was planning his victory party, I was on the phone. I have been in contact with private equity firms and allied investors who knew and respected my father. I have leveraged my personal wealth and the full assets of the Vance family to secure enough capital to not only stabilize our stock price, but to initiate a massive buyback program. Furthermore, I have secured proxy votes from enough wavering shareholders to definitively block any hostile takeover. Etheria's bid is dead on arrival. A stunned silence filled the room. Julian Croft's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed at his own game by a woman he dismissed as a decorative wife. However, Ellie said, turning her attention to the board, this does not solve our core problem. The market has lost faith in our leadership. The brand is damaged. A change is necessary. Her eyes, for the first time, moved to Alistair. He looked up at her, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. He saw not a hint of mercy. The bylaws of the Vance Family Trust, which I have distributed, grant me the power to call for a vote of no confidence in the CEO. I am now formally exercising that power. I call for a vote on the immediate removal of Alistair Finch as Chief Executive Officer of Finch Dynamics. It was a public execution, delivered with surgical precision. All those in favor? Ellie asked, her voice like steel. One by one, hands went up around the table. Marcus Thorne, the others. It was unanimous. The board, seeing a path to survival, had abandoned its creator. Alistair slumped in his chair, a broken man. It was over. The motion carries, Ellie announced, her tone flat, devoid of triumph. Alistair Finch is removed as CEO, effective immediately. I will be stepping in as interim chairwoman of the board to oversee the transition and begin the search for a new chief executive. This meeting is adjourned. She stood up. She had won. She had saved her father's company. She had avenged her own betrayal. As she walked out of the boardroom, she passed Julian Croft, who glared at her with pure hatred. She met his gaze and gave him a smile that was all ice. She passed Cassandra, who was staring at the table, her career and reputation in ashes. And finally, she passed Alistair's chair. She didn't look down. She just kept walking, leaving the wreckage of 3 lives in her wake as she went to build her own. 3 months later, the world of Finch Dynamics was a different place. The panic had subsided, replaced by a steady, confident hum of activity. The stock had rebounded, stabilized by the buyback program and the market's growing confidence in its new, unexpected leader. Eleanora Vance Finch, she had legally dropped her husband's name, was no longer the interim chairwoman. The board, impressed by her sharp instincts, steely resolve, and surprisingly ruthless efficiency, had made the position permanent. She was a natural. She governed with a quiet authority that commanded more respect than Alistair's bombastic charm ever had. She trimmed the fat, cut wasteful vanity projects, and refocused the company on its core principles of innovation and quality, the principles her father had instilled from the beginning. She was not just protecting a legacy, she was redefining it. Her office, the one that had been Alistair's, was transformed. The cold modern art was replaced with warm impressionist landscapes. The massive, intimidating desk was swapped for a collaborative round table. And in the corner, near the window overlooking the city, was a beautiful, handcrafted bassinet, waiting. At nearly 9 months pregnant, Ellie was more radiant than ever. The fragility was gone, replaced by a deep, grounded strength. She moved through the world with the unshakable certainty of a woman who had faced the worst and had not only survived but thrived. Alistair, in contrast, was a man adrift. Stripped of his title and his identity, he had retreated from the world. He sold his sports cars, his bachelor properties. He spent his days walking aimlessly through the city, a ghost haunting the streets where he was once a king. The scandal had made him a pariah. The loss of Ellie and his unborn child had hollowed him out. He had finally understood the difference between what he had and what he'd lost. He'd had a kingdom, but what he'd lost was his home. One crisp autumn afternoon, he did the one thing he hadn't yet dared to do. He went to the Finch Dynamics Tower. He didn't have an appointment. He simply stood in the lobby until Ellie's assistant, recognizing him, nervously called upstairs. To his surprise, Ellie agreed to see him. He was led up to the office he had once occupied. Seeing her there, behind that new table, her hand resting on her huge belly, was like a physical blow. She was powerful, serene, complete. Everything he was not. "Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy. "Alistair," she replied, her tone polite, neutral. "Please, sit." He sat, feeling like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. The silence stretched between them, filled with the ghosts of everything they had been. "I didn't come to talk about the company," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "or the money. I know that's all gone. I came to apologize. Not the pathetic excuses I sent in texts. A real apology." He looked at her, his eyes raw with a pain she had never seen in him before. The arrogance was gone, burned away by the fires of his own making. "I destroyed us, Ellie. I know that. I was arrogant, and weak, and a fool. I took the most precious thing in my life, you, our family, and I threw it away for nothing. For ego. I broke your heart, and I betrayed our son before he was even born. And I will live with that for the rest of my life. There is no excuse. There is only the fact that I did it. And I am sorry. So deeply, deeply sorry." Tears were streaming down his face now, unchecked. It was the most honest, most vulnerable she had ever seen him. Ellie listened, her expression unreadable. The part of her that had once loved him so fiercely felt a pang of the old ache, but it was like remembering a song from a long time ago. The melody was familiar, but the emotion was distant. "I don't hate you, Alistair," she said finally, her voice soft. "I don't have the energy for it. Hate is an investment, and you are no longer an asset in my life." The words were colder than any curse she could have leveled. "I'm not asking for you to take me back," he said quickly, wiping at his face. "I know that's impossible. The trust is broken forever. I'm asking. I'm begging. For a chance to be his father. Let me be a part of his life. That's all I have left to ask for." Ellie was silent for a long time, looking out the window at the sprawling city below. This was the final decision, the last thread connecting their old life to the new one she was building. "He deserves a father," she said at last, turning back to him. "And you are his father. You will be a part of his life." A wave of profound relief washed over Alistair's face. "But it will be on my terms," she continued, her voice hardening with that familiar steel. "There will be schedules, boundaries. There will be no confusion for him about where home is. You will have a role, but you will not have a say. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered, nodding. "Anything. I understand." "Good," she said, her tone becoming brisk, the chairwoman returning. "My assistant will be in touch with your lawyer to work out the details." It was a dismissal. Alistair stood, a man pardoned but not freed. He looked at her one last time, this magnificent, strong woman who was carrying his son, the woman he had lost. "Thank you, Ellie," he said, and turned and walked out of the office, out of the company, out of her life. Ellie watched him go, then placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, steady movement of the new life within her. The story wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happy reunion, no simple forgiveness. The betrayal had left a scar that would never fully fade. But from the ashes of that fire, she had forged a new reality. She was a mother. She was a leader. She was the sole architect of her own future. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. Years flew by, not as a blur, but as a series of sharp, vivid moments. Robbie Vance grew into a bright, curious boy with his mother's thoughtful eyes and a spark of his father's old, restless energy. Eleonora, now simply Eleanor Vance, helmed Finch Dynamics with a visionary's touch, steering it into new frontiers of sustainable technology and ethical AI, earning her a reputation not just as a powerhouse, but as a pioneer. Alistair, true to his word, had stepped back. The foundation he'd started as a PR stunt became his life's work. He poured his wealth and his still sharp business mind into it, building it into one of the world's leading pediatric health charities. He was a different man, quieter, more thoughtful, humbled by a loss that had reshaped him from the inside out. He saw Robbie every Tuesday and Saturday, without fail. He wasn't the fun parent with extravagant gifts anymore, he was the dad who taught Robbie how to code, who took him to the Natural History Museum, who patiently answered a million why questions. The scene of their new reality was a sun-drenched Saturday at Robbie's elementary school science fair. Robbie, now 7, stood proudly beside a complex model of a water filtration system, explaining the mechanics with a confidence that made Eleanor's heart swell. Alistair stood on the other side of the table, his smile genuine and free of any of its old, predatory charm. He was just a dad, proud of his son. When the judging was over and Robbie had a blue ribbon pinned to his shirt, Eleanor and Alistair found themselves standing together, watching their son celebrate with his friends. "He has your brain," Alistair said quietly, his eyes on Robbie. "He sees the whole picture." "He has your focus," Eleanor replied, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "When he gets an idea, nothing else exists." The old tension was gone, replaced by a comfortable, respectful peace. They were partners, not in marriage, but in the far more important enterprise of raising a good man. "Eleanor," Alistair said, turning to her. "I know I've said it before, but thank you. For letting me be his father. For not letting me buy my way back in, but forcing me to earn it. You saved more than the company that night. You saved me from myself." Eleanor looked at the man before her. The ghosts of betrayal were distant echoes now, faded by time and his proven, consistent change. She saw not the husband who had broken her heart, but the father who was helping to shape her sons. "You earned it, Alistair," she said, and the warmth in her voice was real. "We did." As they watched their son, the legacy they once fought over was no longer about a name on a building or a stock price on a screen. It was him. A happy, brilliant, and deeply loved boy, standing under a blue sky, holding his ribbon. And for the first time in a very long time, they stood together, not as adversaries, but as allies, a family reforged in fire, stronger and more real than the perfect lie they had left behind. What did you think of Ellie's ultimate power move? Was her journey from a heartbroken wife to a powerhouse CEO inspiring? And what about Alistair's path to redemption? Do you believe true change is possible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of drama, revenge, and powerful transformations, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more incredible stories.